It's I, Wacky Anime What If here to present you with What If Deku had the Frankenstein quirk, Part 1. Let's go ahead and get into it. Currently a 4-year-old Izuku Midoriya is playing in a sandbox in the park. As he notices in the corner of his eye, Bakugo and two of his goons dragging one little kid with him. As Bakugo is dragging another kid with them directly into the park, all of a sudden, Izuku sees him throw the kid directly at a tree and pin him directly on the tree, while start to berate him and beat him to the ground. Izuku cannot handle watching this and immediately gets up out of the sitting position he was in the sandbox and runs directly towards him. As he runs towards him, he says, "Kachan, stop! You're hurting him!" As he says this, Bakugo turns around and looks at him directly in the eyes and says, "So what? After all, he's a Deku just like you. He didn't get his quirk at all. He might not even get his. He might just be a late bloomer, but that doesn't change the fact he'll just have a weak quirk later on and he's just a stepping stone. So why don't you buzz off, Deku?" As he says this towards Izuku, Izuku immediately appears in front of the victim and spreads out his hands and is directly in front of him in a protective manner. As Bakugo sees this as a challenge, as Bakugo stares at him and says, "I guess you want another beating," as he pops off a few explosions, and one of his goons has his wings pop out, while another one had really sharp nails. They immediately rush towards Izuku, and when Izuku is blocking all these blows for the victim behind him, the victim's looking at him and is quite inspired, as the victim wants to help him but doesn't really think he can. As Izuku's being punched directly in the stomach by Bakugo with one mini explosion popping off, Izuku notices something different. He doesn't feel any pain from this. Usually he would. But right afterwards, all of a sudden, he was slapped in the back of the head by the guy with nails. The nails actually digged in the back of his head a little bit. As he fell to the ground, all of a sudden, he rolled over, and he looked into the sky. That's odd. He can't really move his body right now, as all of a sudden, POV change. Currently, Bakugo has punched Izuku directly in the stomach and popped a mini explosion, expecting it to hurt, but Izuku looked unfazed. This angered him and his goons. One of them went directly behind him and slapped him in the back of the head with their sharp nails. But as soon as they did, all of a sudden, his head came clean off, and it fell to the ground and rolled over once. And its eyes were staring in the skies, not blinking at all. As Izuku and his two crones saw this, as Bakugo and his two cronies saw this, as well as the victim, they all started screaming. Bakugo immediately started screaming like a little girl, which actually caused the police to be called later on, like about 30 minutes later. But as he was screaming like a little girl, and the other two had definitely pissed themselves, and the victim's just screaming his head off until he notices that Izuku's blinking, his head's blinking. So he walks up towards the head, and he picks it up. Absolutely terrified when Bakugo sees the victim that he just literally was trying to beat up, just lifted up Izuku's head, and just has an unfazed face, and he's just poking the cheek of the face. He's just poking Izuku's left cheek. To Bakugo, it just looks like he's poking a headless, like an actual head. He's just poking a head. Bakugo just starts screaming and running for the hills, so does his goons. And the victim just looking at Izuku's head and says, Are you okay there? And Izuku says, "Yeah, I'm okay, but why are they screaming? And why can't I feel my body? And why are you, like, holding me by the head? How are you lifting me up? Do you have a super strength quirk?" As the kid just looks at him and starts to laugh a little bit as he says, No, wait, you said you were a late bloomer, right? Is what they were implying when they were saying that stuff, right? As Izuku says, "Yeah, I am." As he says, "Well, congratulations, you have your quirk, but your quirk apparently removed your head." So, as Izuku says, "I don't believe you, you're just trying to prank me or something." As he says, am I?" As he points his head towards his literal body, the direction of his body, which is currently chasing after Bakugo, as Bakugo is running away saying, "Stop following me," as the body is just running towards him, trying to find where his head is, but going towards the first thing that moves, just on instinct, so it's chasing Bakugo, as Izuku and the victim both start to laugh, and the victim starts to actually hold his stomach, but forgets that Izuku's head was there, directly in his hand, so he drops it. As he does, the body immediately runs towards his head. As it starts running towards him, the victim starts being creeped out too, and just runs away. As the body is chasing after the victim of Bakugo's bullying, Izuku says, "Hey, so what's your name?" As the victim who's currently running just starts panicking and says, "My name, it's Kirishima." As Kirishima says this, and is absolutely exhausted because Izuku's body is just chasing after him, and he's just really creeped out. He knows Izuku means no harm, but it's just creeping him out that a headless body is just running after him. As this is happening, all of a sudden a police car arrives directly in front of the park. As two officers get out, they see a headless kid's body running after another kid and a head on the ground. Immediately, the police are very, very confused about what's happening. As one of them walk up towards the kid who's being chased and says, "Hey kid, can you tell me what's happening while you're being chased by that corpse?" As he says, "Well, he unlocked his quirk and I was being beaten up by a few kids. He saved me from them, and, well, one of them punched his head off." As immediately the police officer said, "Hey kid, head on the ground." As Izuku looks towards him and says, "Oh, wait, you're talking to me?" As the officer says, "Oh, yeah, I didn't know there's other heads on the ground." As Izuku says, "I think that's sarcasm." As the officer says, "No shit." As the other officer looks at him and says, "Hey, you can't curse in front of kids." As the other officer says, "I don't care. I'm Jeff. I don't really care. Like, I do not get paid to care." As David looks at him and says, "Really, Jeff?" As Jeff says, "Fuck you, David." As David says, "No, fuck you." As they both start going back and forth. And Izuku's body is still chasing the kid, by the way, Kirishima. As Izuku's just looking at them going back and forth and says, "Hey, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but could you please reattach my head to my body?" As he said, the officers say, we prefer not to. Can you just do it yourself? Just try to will your body to come towards you." As Izuku says, if I could do that, I would have been doing that. As he tries it for the first time, just not wanting to admit that he was wrong. And all of a sudden, his body stops chasing Kirishima, walks up towards him, and Izuku says, "All right, now go ahead and pick up my head body. Come on, you can do it. I believe in you." And he started trying to hype his body up, and his body's getting excited as he tries to pick up his head. But only right when it tries to pick up his head, kneel down to pick up its head, it immediately kicks his head further away, like a soccer ball. And every time it runs up towards his head trying to pick it up, it just kicks it further away. As Kirishima was watching this, as having a hard time not laughing, as both of the cops are thinking, "Oh, he's playing headball. I used to love that when I was a kid," one of them says as a joke. As the other one says, "Yeah, it was a great sport," as they both laugh as well. Until all of a sudden, the body finally picks up his head, and it puts his head right back on. And he says, "All right, now, why do I feel weird?" As the officers and Kirishima look at him, and all three of them say with a deadpan face, "Your head's on backwards." As Izuku says, "Oh, should I remove it and put it back on? Wait, I want to try this out and see if it works." As his head turns all the way around directly back into the front. And this absolutely terrifies all three of them. As Kirishima says, "I didn't know I was friends with the Exorcist." I was not aware that I was friends with the brother of the girl from the Exorcist. As both of the other cops look at this and they're just absolutely horrified. One of them says, "Oh my, he could do the same thing my ex-wife does." As David says, "Oh, wait, wasn't your ex-wife my sister?" As Jeff says, "Oh yeah, she was. Also, she's very bitchy." As David says, "Hey, that's my sister, but I agree with you." As they're having conversation, Izuku just walks up towards officers and taps them and says, "Aren't you gonna need to report or anything?" As David and Jeff both look at each other and says, "Oh, actually, we're not actual cops. We actually just went to a costume party. We just heard a scream." As Izuku says, "So you're not actually cops, but you arrived here in cop uniform with a cop car. Are you two criminals?" As both of them look at each other and says, "We choose not to answer that. We'll just be out of your hair real quick." As they both go back into the police car and they start driving off, and another police car just starts chasing them. As this is happening, Izuku looks towards Kirishima and says, did we just talk to two criminals? As Kirishima says, I think so. Was one of them named Jeff? As all of a sudden, in the distance, you could see Jeff literally putting his head directly out of the police car while screaming, "My name is Jeff," while running away from the police in his car. As this is happening, Izuku says, "So, Kirishima, when are your parents going to pick you up?" Kirishima immediately says, "Oh, about in a few minutes, apparently." As all of a sudden he hears his parents and says, "Oh, or maybe now." As Kirishima looks towards Izuku and says, "Oh, also here." As he gets out a piece of paper and starts to write on it. Immediately hands it towards Izuku and says, "Make sure your mom calls my parents. We can probably hang out later on. After all, what you did was quite kind of manly." As Izuku says, "Wait, you said it was manly?" As Kirishima says, I say that a lot. You'll get used to it." As Izuku says, as long as you get used to my muttering." As he says, "Wait, what muttering?" As Izuku says, "Before you go, what's your quirk?" And immediately he says, I have the quirk called hardening. I can harden any of my body. I can harden my entire body to where a knife or anything like that cannot really harm me, and I'm more durable." As Izuku immediately sees him, looks at him and says, "Alright, so you're a metapod." As Kirishima says, "I'm not a metapod." As Izuku says, "Metapod, use hardening." And Kirishima uses hardening on instinct. And as that happens, they both look at each other before laughing. As Kirishima finally leaves, and Izuku finally waits for his mom. As his mom arrives, he runs up towards her, very excited, but very relaxed at the same time, not noticing that whenever he relaxes, his body parts start to fall off. His head just falls clean off as he runs towards his mom, and his body is still running towards his mom as his head fell off. And he says, "Body, come back! Baby, come back!" As he says this, his body's just not coming back. He's just running towards his mom and hugs it. As his mom just has a blank expression in her eyes before looking at Izuku's headless corpse hugging her. And just starts to scream and says, "What happened to my baby?" As Izuku says, "Mom, it's just my quirk. Don't worry." As he falls to the ground, and Izuku says, "Mom, are you okay? Mom, mommy." As he starts to say this over and over until she finally wakes up, and she's quite annoyed because she heard that even when she woke up. Right when she woke up, she kept on hearing it. She got up off the ground and looked towards Izuku's headless corpse and towards the head. And before she could pass out again, Izuku says, "It's just my quirk. It's just my quirk. Please don't pass out again. I don't want to stay here all night. It's already been like 2.5 hours since you passed out." As she says, "Oh, okay, so can you like put your head on by yourself?" Or Izuku immediately says, "Actually, I like it better if you could put my head on for me, please." As she walks up towards Izuku's head, lifts it up, and she starts to think this is quite morbid. As she puts the head right back on Izuku's body and it reattaches, Izuku says, "So can we go to the quirk doctor tomorrow?" And she says, "Yeah, we can go to the quirk doctor tomorrow." As she takes him home and he's very excited. That's where I'm going to end What If Deku Had the Frankenstein Quirk Part 0. I'm going to label this Part 0. Also, I know that I didn't edit this video. I'm sorry, I don't know how to edit, and it seemed like it would be very, very hard to. I also wanted to have more time with my videos instead of worrying about it. Sorry about that, if you don't like that. But anyway, I hope you all have a good day, and goodbye.